Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture and the paranormal, coming to you from sunny West London. My name is Gordon and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, we welcome back to the show the artists, writers and publishers behind the one and only Ask For It By Name, Scarlet Imprint. Peter and Alkistis, thank you very much for your time.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Gordon.
All right, so Babalon, I've been looking forward to this one. I mean, it must be, what year is this? So it's 10 years since you were actually writing the book. What do you think has changed when it comes to Babalon in the previous decade?
Well, the terrifying thing is, although it looks like 10 years since I was writing it, the process of writing it probably took about 7 years. So the book's now kind of like, 17 years in the magical past, which is quite an alarming thing to see. But what's changed in the last 10 years has been huge. When we created Scarlet Imprint, essentially to publish the Red Goddess, there was a pretty moribund magical scene at the time. There was very little practical work being produced. None of the publishers were doing quite what we were interested in doing, and the release of the Red Goddess in the first edition of 156 copies really ignited something. So in terms of talismanic publishing, it was a pretty dramatic success. And the impetus of that has really ignited and carried what Scarlet Imprint's done for the last 10 years. And we came in at a pretty interesting time, at a pretty interesting crossroads in terms of the information revolution and in terms of the publishing revolution. And in terms of the magical scene undergoing this next level of renaissance, which I think the work that we've done has been partly responsible for. So it's been an exciting 10 years.
I think what we've seen especially is that the world has clearly been plunged into crisis, ecological, economical, and Babalon always manifests in times of crisis. That's what we've seen historically. And even we weren't really aware why she was coming through so strongly, but particularly with the publication of 16, which was, a couple of years before that, we were becoming very aware of the critical situation the planet and humanity was in and everything on the planet.
Well, yeah, 2007 is the year to publish a book about an apocalyptic goddess. Given the intervening almost 10 years now, you're right that we're seeing a financial and social collapse of the West. We're also seeing the blowback from that sort of high watermark of imperialism tear through lands that are historically associated with Babalon, and it just seems like
there's a very strong resurgence of physical reality. And I think Babalon is very much a goddess that manifests through the physical. If you look at the Bible, God is just a voice. He only ever speaks. You hear him, you don't see him. And Babalon is visible. It's like in the Daughter of Fortitude where she declares, "I will open my garments and stand naked before you." It's a visual revelation and a physical revelation, and it's visceral. You experience it. And I think it's a connection again of the voice and the word to the body in a way that the Christian Bible and most of what's gone on for the last 2,000 years has sort of rendered like separate. And I think that's very much a part of what's happening now, is that the body and the physical reality of what we are is emerging very strongly again. I think this is part of this apocalyptic vision.
I mean, certainly the eschatology of Babalon, and when the Red Goddess was first published, one of the things that people reacted to strongly was how apocalyptic it was, and the
negative.
idea that we were in this time of crisis was something that people found very difficult to accept, particularly because eschatology had been kind of engineered out of any dialogue around Babylon. And it
still pretty much is.
Still very often it is. People will talk about Babylon in terms of
female liberation,
but they won't talk about Babylon in terms of eschatology. They won't talk about her in terms of the very real state of war and climate and species and ecology collapse that's happening. And I think we've kind of been vindicated in our approach to that.
Well, it's what's come through our work.
Well, yes, on that, Peter, when you mentioned that the book was sort of 7 years in the writing, I don't think I've heard this story. What was the glimmer? So go back from 7 years prior to the publication.
Yeah.
What was the thing that kind of tweaked in your head and this book should probably exist?
Well, I think like everyone, when you first encounter the Bible, you're aware that the revelation seems out of sync with the rest of the text, because it has what seemed to be an entirely new cast of characters. It has an entirely radical seeming vision of something that's unfolding, and it seems far more pagan. It seems far more incongruous, and it seems far more real than certainly a lot of the New Testament does for me. So I can remember as a child being really impacted by this, and that kind of came back as I went through my period of sexual awakening, and exploring the mysteries of sex and of my identity, and then as I moved into magic, she was the goddess who spoke to me, and so as I looked at her and as I looked at the material, I was aware that no one had written a history of this goddess, and the material that was out there was extremely fractured and extremely misleading, largely because a lot of it was coming through the cultic filter of fundamentalist Thelema, really, or through fundamentalist Christianity. And it was clear that neither of those readings were doing justice to her. So, as a ritual magician, the book itself came out of the focus of my magical work, and that's encoded in the book, but it's not particularly explicit. So, if you look at the chapter in the work around Waratah. Waratah blossoms in Crowley's Book of Lies. Book of Lies is probably my favourite Crowley text.
Seconded.
Well, I realised that the Waratah blossoms could be unpacked and used as a ritual way of approaching contact with the goddess. So I engaged like a good ritual magician in what turned out to be probably around a 7-year process of working with the individual heads of the beast, as given in Waratah Blossoms, and with those at the time mapped roughly to the idea of the Sephira. And my explanation for that is in the Red Goddess in terms of which Sephira I think correspond to which heads. So I underwent a series of workings with each of these heads in turn, until I had the revelation that each head would teach me. So although I'm saying a 7-year process, it wasn't like 1 year, one head. It varied depending on how the process went, how the process developed, and how the revelations came. And that was concurrent with me writing and bringing together the manuscript for the Red Goddess. So the Red Goddess was driven by this personal magical exploration, and at the time I considered whether I would lay out my full ritual process with the text, and I didn't actually go on and do that because I'm always concerned that magicians tend to write very prescriptively. They tend to say, stand here, do this, wear that, say this, and you will get X result. And I don't think that's necessarily true, with the caveat that having watched Stephen speaking the other night about goetic evocation, that clearly there are steps and procedures that must be followed in magic for it to be effective. In terms of a very personal and revelatory work like this, my work is not going to be someone else's work. So my work with Babalon is not going to be your work with Babalon, and I didn't want to impose that upon people. So The Red Goddess was really a very magical book that kind of is concurrent with my development of these mysteries, with my magical attainments along the way.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, were you aware going into it that you were going to manifest your own Marjorie Cameron?
Well, that was the final proof.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, the people often say this. They say, "Oh, no one's done a Babalon working since Jack, blah blah blah," or people use the word Babalon working very loosely to mean they've got a new partner and they're having sex with them, which that's maybe one thing, but what I undertook was a Babalon working which would only have been ratified if I had been delivered the proof in terms of an avatar of Babalon, and an Alkistis is that. Now, I need to qualify that because I think it's very problematic when people talk about...
my side of the story is completely different.
Well, we're going to get to that one.
I find it very problematic when people say Antichrist singular or say Babalon singular and start to make claims for themselves. I'm not making a personal claim for myself or for Alkistis to be like worshipped on fucking altars by the universe. This is where people go mad in magic. That's completely the wrong approach.
I'm mad enough already.
What I'm saying is that Babalon is present in all women and all things. However, when Alkistis appeared, she gave me a whole range of signs and proofs that she was unaware of, in the same way that Crowley did with Rose when Crowley underwent his initiation into the Book of the Law, and Rose was able to answer all his questions. Alkistis did something extremely similar with me in terms of providing proofs about Babalon, coming from a background where she wasn't steeped in the traditions and therefore wasn't able to simply regurgitate these answers from her unconscious. And these were proofs for me, but the proof for the world is in the work and the fact that Scarlet Imprint came out of essentially nothing to become probably one of the most important occult publishers in the world, and to be instrumental in transforming the current magical revival. And for me, that's a pretty staggering set of proofs.
Marjorie, would you like to give your side of the story?
Well, I'd kind of dropped out of normal life. We're talking a little bit about this in London. I gave up my job and decided I'm a Buto dancer. So I had a pretty bohemian life for a few years, and I was also doing quite a bit of energy work. And I was working with a tantric dakini called Kurukula in a very unorthodox way, perhaps. I mean, it was essentially deity yoga. I was meditating with her. And I had no real interest in the Western tradition because it didn't seem to have any real technology as far as I could see. So I just was doing my thing and dancing. And a series of coincidences got me to start drinking ayahuasca with the Santo Daime. And that led to a 10-day working in Cornwall, strangely enough, just down the coast from where Peter lived. but wasn't there. And that resulted, when I returned from that, which was very, very intense, was meditating about a week or two later, and a being appeared to me in my meditation, a woman, and told me a bunch of things. She made some predictions, and she told me about some things that would happen. And I was just like, that's strange. And I wrote everything down and carried on doing what I was doing. I didn't know who she was. And about 3 months later, I was introduced to Peter by a strange coincidence also that's connected with the ayahuasca. And at that time also, at the same time, I became involved in the London occult scene because I started working with foolish people on a play of theirs, in which I played a character called Lilla, who is like a form of Lilith. And so I was suddenly plunged into the occult, the Western occult scene, as it was in London then, which was about just over 10 years ago. And I met Peter about the same time, and we were corresponding via email, and then we met. And when I met him, it was just crazy because my energetic reaction to him was something I hadn't experienced before with anybody else, and I couldn't sleep. And well, I thought I hated him, I didn't actually realize what it was. And a little bit after that, he started giving me extracts from the Red Goddess, like chapters to read. It hadn't been published, and he was just I was reading this, and I realized reading the book that the goddess that I had seen and that had spoken to me was Babalon, which was like a deep shock, as I didn't expect that. And she's certainly not the goddess I would have chosen to work with if I was, if you choose a deity or a spirit to work with, it tends to be something you feel sympathetic with. But I had a lot of issues with Babalon, with sex, actually. I mean, I liked it, but I was also very, very conflicted about how to express it and sexuality in general. So it would have been it was a nightmare for me to find Peter and to find Babalon, and to be plunged into this world like that. And anyway, things that she had said in this initial vision started to come about, so I couldn't ignore it, and things kind of escalated from there, let's say. Yeah. So I didn't think I was approved. Peter was actually, she told me she would give me Peter. She told me I will give you my lover. I had no idea what she meant by this, but Peter was obviously her lover.
I like that. So you're both Marjorie, basically. Okay, well, interesting that you were talking about the Kurukula work there, because one of the things I remember reading it way back when it came out, actually the next year when I got to London, was kind of breezing through the history of what Babalon isn't. Babalon isn't Kurukula, Babalon isn't Egyptian, Babalon isn't these things. And that was, I think, quite useful, and I'm wondering if we could have a discussion about the actual origins of Babalon, and whether that insight in the book holds true today.
Okay, well, let's do the
origins piece. Yeah,
the origins piece is pretty straightforward if you actually look at the key pieces. The key pieces are the name Babalon, which gives you an identity and a place where she came from. The goddess is probably in one of her earliest forms, Inanna Ishtar, and is a result of the Jewish captivity in Babylon and her anathematization in the Bible. And this idea of Babylon as the site of all evil, the site of whoredom, is used consistently through the Bible as a way to demonize both women, sex, the idea of an oracular priestess, and also to take to finally remove all ideas of a consort of Yahweh from the picture, and to have the worship of women characterized as being a foreign cult and something which is not part of the newly being formed Jewish identity. So it's an attack on women. It's an attack on the ancestor cult. It's an attack on the oracular tradition, which informs almost all of the Bible as you read through it. I was reading Ezekiel the other day, as one does, and if you have a look at Ezekiel 16. Chapter 9, there's pretty much a word-for-word version of the goddess of Revelation to be found in Ezekiel 16:9. But in Ezekiel 16:9, they're of course talking about Astarte, Ashtoreth, and by the time we reach Revelation being of course the critical text, Babylon has become the name of the goddess, the identifier of the goddess as female, as woman, as connected with intoxication. So we got the first two large pieces, which are Inanna Ishtar, Astarte, and that whole construct of goddesses in the Near East, whose identities essentially flow into one another. Then we have her radical demonization in Revelation, which John pens on Patmos as his Christian apocalypse, and then everything goes quiet for a while. This idea of the demonized female continues throughout Europe and resurfaces in the witchcraft panics quite explicitly. Particularly,
it's also there in things like female spirituality, like the ecstatic saints, but they're generally locked away in convents to inoculate society against their contact.
So we go the early goddess forms, then we have Revelation, and then things progress through as Alkistis says, the tradition of female mystics, which then shades into witchcraft, and then we have Dee. And Dee is the other major source for Babylon. And in Dee and Kelly's work, they encounter a goddess who reveals herself in the critical juncture of their work, the final part of their work, in a speech called, which is known as the Daughter of Fortitude, which is very similar to the Gnostic Thunder Perfect Mind. It has the same kind of mouth feel to it. And what Dee does is Dee is pursuing an alchemical and a Christian eschatology, but he ends up at the behest of the angels engaged in a complex sex magical cross-matching operation, and receives a visitation from this goddess whose speech is perhaps one of the most important documents about that gives an identity in a sense of Babylon, in a sense of her immanence and her mission, which is certainly something that Dee wasn't looking for.
Well, for me, I think that's proof of the origin story, because he wasn't looking for it and he was working within a Christian milieu. And as you say, he gets to the end of this, he gets to a critical juncture in this work, and what he finds in the middle of what he thought was this kind of esoteric, but more practical than that, exploration of the world and universe as he saw it. Here is this goddess that basically she was unsuccessfully banished, because she's right there in the middle of the story, and neither Dee nor Kelly would have the kind of patristic historical understanding we have now about the sort of palimpsest origin of the Old Testament and the different gods and angels and Nephilim and everything that's in there that shows that it was a it was much more fecund and diverse and chaotic in its formulation.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the piece that is kind of proof. It's like, this belongs here. This is this form that goes with this worldview.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say what she is, but I know what she feels like. And she's always got a very particular voice and a very particular feeling. And what I find fascinating about the Daughter of Fortitude speech is that she's almost making fun of Yahweh, because she's a jealous lover. She's saying, love only me, cast out your other women and don't tell your secrets to women. She's like the archetypal lover that wants absolute love. And I think that's very Babalon, but there's the contrast with Yahweh, with his jealous God, only follow me, only listen to me, all other gods are not gods. And I think that's kind of interesting, that at the heart of Dee's very, very Christian piety, there's this inversion of the patristic Yahweh, kind of maybe perhaps the revelation he was expecting or hoping for. There's actually a woman who's standing there half naked, telling him, I will be your lover, I will play harlot with you, love me, don't tell these secrets to anyone else. It's really interesting and perverse, and that's very typically Babalon. And I find it also very strange that she always has this quality. She's always very insistent and very, very much plays the lover like that. She's not fair. She's not balanced. She has a quality very, very demanding, and she does not really care much for limitations of humans. So, yeah, and it comes through the Daughter of Fortitude, and it comes through even Liber 49, which is a problematic text in some ways, but also very interesting for the voice of the goddess that it reveals.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is something that echoes unbelievably authentic about the Daughters of Fortitude, or Daughter of Fortitude speech. And she's not only half naked, she's also armed, and I like that. There's like urgency and anger, half naked, armed, and surrounded by the spirits that Dee and Kelly were messing with. I mean, who did they expect to find? Well, we know who they would end up finding if you do that for long enough. But it's just interesting that they think, oh, I thought this was going to be a dude in the middle of it. Turns out it's not. And for me, there's a sort of phenomenological authenticity that kind of demonstrates. Not that, I mean, we knew this already, but it demonstrates to me that they were mainlining the real stuff. If that's what shows up.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
You feel that in the voice, that she's so present, and this is that other very strange thing about her. She's so ancient. I mean, Inanna Ishtar is the first attested example of this, like her appearance, her manifestation in the world. But she's as ancient as this erotic impulse that both, creates, erotic love and death, war. It's very ambiguous. It's one of the reasons I find this connection of Babalon, her framing in terms only of, liberation of female sexuality problematic, because what comes out of this source has a lot of destructive potential as well. And what happens to women in war is not good. Potentially, it can be liberating, and it can also be highly, highly destructive and result in rape, death. She's very, very ambiguous, and I think a lot of that gets overlooked in this kind of feminist interpretations that get placed on her since I guess quite recently. Since not Crowley, though. Crowley's not very feminist. Crowley was like, keep her at arm's length.
But Daughter of Fortitude is also a critical juncture in that it presages what Crowley does with Liber Alva Legis, with the Book of the Law, because Liber Alva is, as we know, essentially a cut-up. It's a cut-up of Anna Kingsford's material. It's a cut-up of Blavatsky's material. And it's also a cut-up of the Daughter of Fortitude. So when you're reading the Daughter of Fortitude, she says, I will open my garments and stand naked before you, that your love may be more inflamed toward me. And that's pretty much identical to Liber Legis 162, where she says, at all my meetings with you, the priestess shall say, and her eyes shall burn with desire as she stands bare and rejoicing in my secret temple, to me, calling forth a flame of the hearts of all in her love chant. So Crowley is clearly familiar with the Enochian material when he's regurgitating it in Liber Legis. And so it's then important to really talk about the impact of Crowley upon this. And Crowley introduces several difficulties. The major difficulty of Crowley is that he begins with his identification with the great beast and his rejection of his Christian upbringing. So he frames a proportion of his material in Christian language. And then when he's in Egypt, he receives a revelation that he fashionably relays in this kind of like Deco Egyptian style. And he ends up with a very difficult theological conundrum, where he has on the one hand the idea of Babylon and the beast, and on the other hand this trinity of Nuit, Hadit, and Rahuquit. And then he tries to confuse Nuit with Babylon, due to the fact that in Liberal, when Nuit makes her appearance, she comes on in a lot of places like a very earthy love goddess and not like the star goddess.
Yeah, and we're going to pick up on that story, but he, as a result of this conflation, he sent a couple of other subsequent people awry, which we'll get to, but, well, we'll just name them now, Kenneth Grant and Jack Parsons. But yeah. Let's pick up the story with what his attempted solve did well and definitely did not do well.
Yeah, dear Alistair, a lot of my magical background is in Thelema and in the structured work that Crowley presented. So it's very important that people understand that while I'm critical of Crowley, I also recognise the great contributions that he made. He did a lot of good work, but I think the most problematic thing he did was to try to create a religion and try to position himself as the world teacher. And he did a lot of damage to the idea of Babylon and created a lot of confusion, whereas now we have people who argue, for example, that Babylon is a Thelemic goddess. So, for example, if you went to the Wikipedia page, which I don't recommend you do, and tried to find a definition of Babylon, you'll just get a load of Thelemic nonsense.
Jargon.
Because they've decided that Babylon is a subset of Thelema, when in fact Thelema is a subset of Babylon. That's a major issue for them. And Crowley is complicated because you can read Crowley and find all the light, love, liberty, light material. You can find all the sex positive material. And then you can look at it again and you can say, well, Crowley was a shit. Crowley treated women like dirt. Crowley destroyed all of the women who worked with him. He really was, he punched them and threw them down flights of stairs. He drove them to alcoholism. He really acted in a fucking appalling manner towards women.
The problem with Babylon is that she has the power. So if the Scarlet Woman is identified with Babylon, then Crowley has to give up his power to her, and that's never going to happen.
Well, so that was going to be my observation. She's the goddess everyone wants to put in the corner, and it's the one you probably shouldn't do that to, know, the most.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the difficulty that.
For the male magician, he absolutely has to give up his ego for this. And I think for Crowley that was impossible.
In fact, Crowley states as much in his diary records. And again, that's something that I quote in The Red Goddess. So Crowley's problem is that he's trying to present himself as the great beast, but he can't allow a woman to have equal stature with him. So Babalon in Crowley's version is confined beyond the abyss in the city of the pyramids. You know, she's kept in a position where she can't be on earth and argue with him, which is exactly the opposite of what we see in the Daughter of Fortitude, where she's saying, no, I'm imminent. I'm coming for you. You know, I intend to be among you. And that's what happens with Jack's work. That's where Jack Parsons breaks so decisively from Crowley in the way that he brings it down, whereas Crowley tries to keep it at arm's length.
I think that bringing down. So my observation, and we're going to take the Jack story quite away now, but my observation is, I mean, obviously it was an imperfect and clumsy thing because they always are, but I think Crowley's conception of Babalon kind of confused Jack insofar as how she would present in his life, and he kind of falls into the sort of world teacher era a bit as well. Yeah. And just as a sort of cul-de-sac going through Kenneth Grant, because we'll not spend too much time on him, is the historical conflation, because she, as Alkistis mentioned, she feels old. She is old. She's kind of built of
she's in your marrow.
Yeah, that sort of very old feeling. So you have them. I mean, Crowley did the same thing, trying to and then Grant picked it up, but trying to plug his, Egyptophilic cosmology into Samaria, or try to Lego these pieces together, and that doesn't quite work because they've come through, and that so Kenneth Grant kind of got the wrong end of the historical stick, and I think there's something about Jack's expectations of the Babalon working that were a bit messed up by Crowley's world teacher-ness, expecting Babalon to show up in a woman that he could continue to hit and knock down the stairs if she displeased him. Yeah.
I mean, that's the, this is the cognitive dissonance that you find in Thelema. There are a lot of strong, independent women in Thelema, but they're existing in a state of cognitive dissonance in the same way that when you find women in Islam trying to persuade you that Islam is a feminist religion, or when you find women in Christianity trying to tell you that Christianity is a female positive religion, the texts do not bear this out. It doesn't work. And also, if you stick to a straight Crowley conception, then you have to create this horrible hybrid Nuit Isis Babalon mess, which makes no sense.
It is a mess. It's an octoparrot.
It is. It makes no sense at all. And Grant inherited this because Grant was also, Grant is a mess. Grant's very exciting when you first read Kenneth, and he was even more exciting before we had access to more of the accurate historical material. When you read Grant, I can't read Grant now. It just disintegrates. It just absolutely falls apart under your fingers. I mean, Kenneth was trying to do something very creative, and he's trying to do something very. We seem quite exciting, particularly in the 80s, 90s, and the feel around Starfire and the feel around the people around.
It had the energy.
Like Typhonia and OTO had the energy that the Caliphate didn't have. And that was exciting, but to use their cult jargon, the current moves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And it may have moved in that direction. I mean, I would say this, but it may have moved in that direction principally so that Steffi can recognize Austin Spare and re-elevate him. And that may have been what the current was for, is my observation from the outside of both.
Yeah, I think that's a good read. Yeah,
I think so.
Cool. So let's let's wind back a couple of decades and go to Handsome Jack.
Let's do it. And Jack is. I won't give the full Jack story because I've done it a lot of times. Jack does something very interesting. Jack is very much the new generation of magician. Jack is someone who stands between the dying Crowley and the modern world. I mean, he's literally on that nuclear axis of the splitting out into the new age.
It's another fault line again that's opening up, and he and Marjorie represent very much people who are at the vanguard of that fault opening. And again, Babalon manifests through these fault lines and these periods of crisis, and I think that's what's happening. It's they're in the throes of McCarthyism style America, and it's before the Bohemian Revolution really flowers. Marjorie is very much a pioneer of this, and Jack didn't really live to see that, but what he did was certainly right at that start of the fault line, if not creating the fault line with his explosions.
Well, the explosions, before we pick up on the story, I think are underemphasized in the sense of how one might attract the attention of a goddess like Babalon. Yes. Going out into the desert and blowing things up will do it.
She will be very interested in you.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much, you have to keep her entertained. She's a very demanding lover. She's like a very, very demanding lover. If you don't keep her entertained, then you're really in trouble. I mean, it's a dangerous force to work with because...
as I keep reminding you.
Because the deal is simple. The deal is every drop of blood goes into the cup. So working with Babalon is not kind of like a halfway thing. You can't drop in and use Babalon as a goddess for a love spell working and then expect to walk away and do something else with your life. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. She has a very, very specific deal. And what Jack did, Jack had the energy and the wildness and the belief that anything was possible. Anything was possible. There was a new world starting to unfold, and he'd come across this crazy new religion which was affirming it for him. And Jack felt he was at the forefront of this new religious movement, of this new way of seeing things. And he made the mistake of reading Crowley and reading the grade papers and believing that it was okay to climb the ladder, which is always a mistake, because in hierarchical organizations, you're not meant to climb the ladder. You're meant to stay in your pigeonhole. You're not meant to exceed the master. Whereas Jack saw, Jack was reading Jules Verne. Jack was, interested in putting man on the moon. Jack wanted to both please Crowley and exceed Crowley. So that's why he brought through working with the Enochian, through working with sex magic, and he brought through this remarkable document in Liber 49, the Book of Babalon, which is a text we've actually been doing quite a lot of work with recently. And it's a text that I think bears study, even though it's unequal. It's not. It's got a lot of problems with it, but it also has the voice in it. It has the presence of the goddess in it, and I think that's really very, very exciting. But Jack's work is something that I went back to last year when we were asked to talk at the anniversary of his death at Treadwell's and do a reading of Liber 49. And I did some more research and looked at his diaries, and I've got an essay online called Strange Suppers and Spells Diverse, which I think makes some very important points about what Jack was doing. There's an idea that Jack was just a wild man and was making stuff up. But when you realise that what he was doing was in fact following through the tenets of OTO sex magic, you find that Jack was going by the numbers. Jack was doing exactly what Alistair expected initiates in his orders to do. And as a result, he got some crazy results. He got the voice of the goddess. He got to come through, and he got his death in the bargain.
As he was told in Liber 49.
Yeah.
Well, I completely agree that the voice is there. I mean, you see there's some very Daughter of Fortitude components to 49, however problematic it is. But if we reduce ourselves to, or restrict ourselves to unproblematic revealed text, we're not going to have very much to read on the plane.
This is the thing with revealed text. They always come through people, and people... It's like the mundus imaginalis exists, and the gods, the daimons, have to speak through it. So they speak through the images that we have in our imaginaries. So everybody will get a different and a very specific and personal manifestation of this impersonal force. Which this is why they're all different and they're similar. And why the problems are also part of just things will manifest for Jack one way, things manifest for me or Peter another way, because we have our imaginaries are filled with different words and images.
So what's important at this stage, really, to dial it back, is that we've seen Babalon begin in Sumeria and with this demonized form of the goddess. We've seen her come through in the revelation of John and then be encoded into Christianity and thereby all of Western culture. We've seen her re-emerge in Dee with the voice of the Daughter of Fortitude. We've seen Crowley struggle to bring it through again, but certainly have some contact. Then Parsons really grasps it, but it's too hot and gets burned. But the current through Parsons is interesting because through Crowley to Parsons, we see Babalon going into witchcraft. And I think this is probably the most important part of the trajectory, is that Babalon isn't moving into, some high magical exposition. Babalon finds her home in an expression of witchcraft, which is still really unfolding. Partly you see it in the early years of Wicca, when Wicca was like a radical form, and you can see Valiente in her letters is aware of the existence of Jack Parsons. You see it in bits of Jack's speech, but it's very much something which is becoming. Babalon is very much a goddess who is in a process of emerging in this time of crisis and being given voice to by many people.
I feel she very much wants to escape the orders and the hierarchy and any form of control. She keeps declaring that she will be free and that it's her time. Time is. And also she gives him the explicit instruction to reveal the secrets that he knows. So I think she very much wants to be released into the world as much as possible. I mean, as Peter said before, this is one reason why he circulates images of Babalon, however mad and Christian they are. It's this absolute inundate the world with her, flood the world with her, because she can come through anything. You could discover her anyway, and it's not about a series of, steps within some hierarchical attainment. It's very witchcraft. It's very in the body. It's very out there. It's very in the world.
So, and I'm just going to jump in there and a bit off it, because when you look at where she's there at the beginning of Sumeria, which it gives us essentially our spiritual cosmology. When she's there with John, that's not only a story of Christianity, that's a story of Rome. So that's two empires. Let's move on to Dee, who more or less created the British Empire. That's three. Let's move on to the Crowley Parsons axis, and there she is at the beginning of the space age. That's interesting.
Yes. I mean, with Dee, it was very interesting because the Daughter of Fortitude spoke in the same year that, and earlier in that spring, Mary Queen of Scots was beheaded, and they were about to, the Armada was preparing to sail on England, and, you know, everything was ramping up. There was this blood sacrifice of a queen, and the queen on the throne was this red-headed whore. So there's always these symbols very strong when she is about.
And you're correct. I mean, she appears at these crisis points, and she tends to manifest to crisis individuals at these crisis points. Points where
always cutting through the cracks.
Points where the old order no longer has the answers to the questions.
Yeah, and what Alkistis was saying about her wanting to be free, she's definitely bolting.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, like running bamboo or some sort of out of control vine across things, because you get the mouthfeel of that. I'm always very interested, as you know, from Starships. I'm very interested in the disconnect between a description of a spiritual experience that people try to match to what they understood of history at the time, which is out of sync, and then subsequent decades of historical research kind of provide additional alignment. And if you look at the We Are the Witchcraft speech, that's actually quite a bit more accurate than the conceptions of Samaria at the time. Certainly it had the negative opinion, or the negative view that would come from the fact that most classicists were, coming from an Anglican milieu. But if we look at, say, the last 20 or 30 years of research into the different spells and the sort of Sumerian version of Defixio and the demons and the things that they were throwing at each other, and you look at it and go, that's a very startlingly accurate description of the magical landscape of what is effectively our first urban culture, especially for, a Californian rocket scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack was very much ahead of his time, and Jack is the breach. Jack and Liber 49 are kryptonite for the established order structures. There's no way you can go back after Liber 49, because Liber 49 is in line with the spirit of the age. Jack she says to Jack, publish the secrets, and they will call you, sot, liar, traducer. They will make you anathema. But what Jack is doing exactly what we see in the information age. He's doing something which is exactly the same as, WikiLeaks.
Orders were necessary to preserve information for a long time, especially in a completely hostile environment, or even through structures such as monasteries, which contained knowledge and really did cloister it and shield people from it, because maybe it is dangerous. And Babalon is the lust for knowledge. Libido sciendi. She is release knowledge. She is follow this lust, follow your curiosity. She's a feeling that's emerging now, and that is actually in line with the way technology is now, because there's no need to keep things within a structure, because that doesn't work. That's actually ossified, and what works is proving it, testing it, working it, taking it out. There's so much more out there, and there's so much more to discover in the body, and there's so much more to discover in the landscape.
Well, yeah, when returning to the vine metaphor, when the sort of soil chemistry is right, the vine will bolt. We can take it out of its pot, and I think that's what she was saying to Jack. And we've had this discussion offline. I think that actually happened. I mean, if we look back at the last 50 years, the Western current went to Jack, because now we have witchcraft, and I mean, there are still, as we say, there's still orders that exist and have their own little arguments and whatever, but if you look at what magic and the Western current have done post Jack, even though he got all blowed up, that probably happened.
Yeah,
it's what it looks like. I mean, it's huge. That's
what the shape of our correspondence and our readership shows. The majority of people who are buying our books, the majority of people who are writing to us are outside of these official structures. I get, and the Red Goddess has proved to be a key for many people because it was written in a way that was designed to undercut all the ridiculous, pompous, magical writing of the time. It was designed to wind people up. It was designed to
earth her.
It was designed to earth her and to create difficulty for people, to force people into these points of crisis.
I found it impossible. I had to work on it 3 times, and it challenged me every time. It's kind of a strange book. I have a very strange relationship with it, but it has a power.
Oh yeah, it's still my favorite of them. I think it's remarkable. But that kind of brings us quite cleanly to the last topic, which is what do we do now?
What do we do now, Gordon? Yeah. Damn good question, really.
You know what my answer is?
Go for it.
Put it in the body.
All right, more specific.
This.
Yeah.
She has to be manifest, and not in one person, and not not on an altar at a distance. She has to be brought into the world through people, through physical everything, through actions, through love, or through everything. I don't know how to say it. It's very simple. I don't know why, because I don't know where we're going. I think we're heading towards extinction rather rapidly, and that I think I said this in that first time we spoke to you, that my work is really focused on what happens beyond this physical body, but I'm doing that by focusing absolutely on developing this physical body, because this is the foundation of the subtle body. And because through that you can affect what happens after the devastation, what happens after the flood, what happens after the fire, because of what we do now, what we create now in our bodies, because this carries through. This is the earthing that creates the seed that will grow afterwards. And I don't know what that will be. But I know that there's nothing else to do with one's life now.
So essentially what Alkistis is saying is liberation. That this is a path of radical liberation for individuals, and it's a path of radical liberation which is different for everybody, which comes out a result of their own personal experiences and the thing that we have.
Your own body will teach you. I've said this before, that every individual's body is their teacher. This is the only teacher. It's the best teacher.
And that requires also
I'm radically anti-order and anti-dogma, radically.
I think it requires us to continue to challenge dogma. It requires us to continue to have these kind of open conversations that we're now able to have. Things that Rune Soup is hosting, I think are extremely valuable in terms of creating and articulating a new magical culture.
Please, please, please let there be people putting her energy into the world more.
A very physical revelation.
Yes, very physical, because when you have experienced her in your body, that intensity of feeling, it's impossible to be a slave. It's impossible to go along with the consensus reality. That feeling is more than anything else that I've ever experienced, or it makes everything else that you experience so much keener, so much sharper. It puts an edge on all your senses, and at the same time you're penetrated by everything. And it's such an experience of being in the world that the status quo cannot be maintained. I don't know. I don't know what's coming. I know what I've been told, and those kind of revelations are not really right to share, because for a start, people wouldn't believe, and people won't believe anything unless they feel it and hear it for themselves. So I think that the work has to be done where people not everybody, whoever feels drawn to this finds this experience within themselves, within their voice, within their body, because that revelation is a continual revelation, and that revelation does not grow skin over it. That revelation does not heal. That revelation is an open wound that keeps flowering and keeps speaking. And what comes after isn't really for us to decide. All of us are just, we are tiny things. We're tiny, tiny, tiny glimmers of light. Yeah.
I like that. That's very good. That seems like a very good place to end, unless there's another part of the story we want to pick up.
Peter?
Well, I think we've given it. I think we've gone over quite a lot of things. I hope that people are familiar with a lot of the key figures and stories that we've kind of rushed through today. And if they're not, we have plenty of free writing online that goes over this material, as well as the Red Goddess, as well as the way that story goes through
Babalon,
apocalyptic witchcraft and
Lucifer. The Goddess is an undercurrent in Peter's other two books as well, even if they're ostensibly about something else. So it's pursued through everything we do.
Yeah, well, for me, Scarlet Imprint is one of the manifestations of that, of a We Are the Witchcraft speech, because it is the things that can happen in a world that is earthing Babalon, whether it likes it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it likes it or not. There are literally thousands of Babalon devotees out there now. And that's
incredible.
That's incredible. And they're all going to have different voices, and they're all going to agree on some points and disagree on others. And I think we're at a very exciting moment of flowering. And in that moment of flowering, it's important that we stay true to these principles of being radically anti-dogmatic, of not repeating the errors that have been made in the past.
Babalon is transformative, so things can't stay the same.
Splendid. All right, so obviously, if people are interested in more, scarletimprint.com, I will have the various essays linked up in the show notes and so on as well. But guys, thank you. Amazing as ever. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, how's that for scintillating? A whole hour of the Red Goddess herself, within which we discuss Dee and the Daughter of Fortitude, Jack Parsons and Liber 49, a true history of Babalon, and the return of the witch cult. If this is your jam, and how could it not be, then please do subscribe in iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, or on YouTube. Leave a comment on the blog, runesoup.com, or in the RuneSoup Facebook page. Or find me on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.